These policies and practices reflect the Israeli government's crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution.
Of Mohammad Bajat, who was 12 years old. He was shot sitting in the back seat of his family's car. Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. We begin with a Human Rights Watch video on the violence in May in Palestine, Israel. There are some brief scenes of violence that you don't want children under 13 to view.
On May 10, 2021, 11 days of hostilities began between the Israeli military and Palestinian armed groups, including Hamas, in the Gaza Strip and Israel. The fighting took place amid escalating repression in occupied East Jerusalem and the prolonged closure of the Gaza Strip. These policies and practices reflect the Israeli government's crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution. Human Rights Watch conducted in-depth investigations into 3 Israeli strikes that killed 62 Palestinian civilians and involved serious violations of the laws of war and apparent war crimes. In the northeastern corner of the Gaza Strip outside Beit Hanun town, shortly after 6 p.m. on May 10, a guided missile struck near 4 houses belonging to the extended Al-Masri family. Members of the family were packing processed barley for animal feed into sacks at the time.
أنا وأخوي إبراهيم حوالي من 150 ل 200 متر بالضبط لما نستهدف أطفالنا. طبعا كان إحنا وجوهنا كان للحدث، شايفين الحدث بعينينا وإحنا جايين عليهم لما ننضربوا. جيت أجري فوق على الفور على المكان إجراي، لقيت اللي هو الموجود اللي هو الأطفالنا كلهم مرميين، هذول كانوا ملقين على الأرض طبعا بأشلاء ودماء أدمغة طائرة من الدماغ. أولاد يوسف.
Israeli authorities have said that the attack involved a misfired Palestinian rocket coming from the west, but have produced no evidence to back up this claim. Witnesses saw a munition approaching them from the east, from Israel. Based on munition remnants found at the scene of the attack and witnesses' descriptions, we determined that the 6 children and 2 adults were most likely killed by a type of guided missile used to attack military vehicles or personnel in the open. 6 days after the attack, the Israeli authorities also included the photo of 1 man killed in the Beit Hanun attack on a list of militant group activists they said had been killed in unspecified locations. Human Rights Watch's interviews with witnesses who knew him indicate the man was a civilian. Our research uncovered no evidence of a military target at or near the site. We therefore found the attack to be unlawful.
المنظر يعني مش عارف مش قادر اتوقع يعني كل الدار بصير يبكوا كل الصبح، كل الدار بصير يصيح. يعني بطلب يعني انت زوجتي بتطلب، عارف شو تطلب؟ لبيع الدار. مش قادر اتوقع اولادها كيف لما ماتوا هان كلهم.
Al-Shati refugee camp, located northwest of Gaza City, is one of the most densely populated places in the world. At about 1:40 a.m. on May 15, an Israeli airstrike destroyed a 3-story building in the camp, killing 2 women and 8 of their children.
أنا كنت أسكن أنا وزوجتي وأولاد ال5 في نفس المنزل. طبعا احنا كنا ساكنين في منزل بسعادة وهناء، بأجواء مليئة بالحب يعني. احنا ساكنين ل 30 عام في هذا المكان، طبعا من دون سابقة انذار، من دون اتصال تحذيري او اخلاء. في الليل ذهبت لشراء يعني خبز عشان يتعشوا، اتفاجأت انه صار في اصوات انفجارات في المكان. انا لقيت بيتي مقصوف. انا
The Israeli military said it struck the building because senior Hamas officials were there. It also separately said that they had targeted a bunker under or near the building. None of the witnesses Human Rights Watch interviewed were aware of any militants or other military targets in or near the building. The Israeli authorities have presented no such evidence.
كان لي واقع هنا، كان لي حلم هنا، كان لي أسرة هنا. أصبحت الآن بلا أسرة بلا بيت، يعني أنا وبنتي الوحيدة أصفينا في الشارع. يعني كل حاجة في حياتي، دمروا حياتي بشكل كامل يعني.
At about 1 a.m. on May 16, the Israeli military launched a 4-minute attack in the heart of Gaza City along 5 streets, including Al-Wahda Street, causing 3 multi-story residential buildings to collapse.
أنا وأبويا وأمي وأخويا وأختي بدينا نسمع انفجارات قوية، فبعدها نزل الصاروخ الثاني على الدار. صارت تروح يمين وشمال زي بدأت تقع أو بدأت تهيل. أنا رحت شديت أختي من إيدها وسحبتها على الممر، حضنتها على أساس إنه أحميها. فجأة لقينا من الصاروخ الثالث بيطلع من الشباك نار، وحيط الممر هيك كلها تنهد، والأرض هيك فجأة كلها اختفت وكل شيء وقع علينا. وبعدها نزل علينا الصاروخ الرابع، دمرنا تدمير يعني.
Human Rights Watch determined that the 3 buildings collapsed after missiles struck the road or sidewalk next to the buildings. The Israeli military said that they targeted tunnels used by armed groups. Later, they said the attack had targeted an underground command center, but without providing any details or evidence.
ليش قتلوا أهلي يعني؟ ليش قتلوا أبويا وأمي يعني؟ ليش شتموني؟ مين هيرجع لي حقي بالأول وبالآخر؟ يعني كيف هيرجعوا لي حقي؟
The attacks killed 44 civilians, including 14 women, 12 men, and 18 children. It also injured about 50 others. The Israeli military used powerful weapons in a heavily populated residential area, putting the lives of scores of civilians at risk. Since then, they have produced no evidence of a military target in the vicinity to justify the attack. If there was a military target, they have also not shown that it was important enough to justify the risk to civilians. As a result, these attacks were unlawful. The UN says that Israeli airstrikes in May killed at least 129 civilians, including 66 children. The Israeli military said that Palestinian armed groups in Gaza fired more than 4,360 rockets and mortars towards Israel between May 10 and 21, resulting in 12 civilian deaths, including 2 children. Several Palestinians also died in Gaza when rockets fired by armed groups fell short and landed in Gaza. Rockets that Palestinian armed groups fire at Israel are inherently indiscriminate when directed towards areas with civilians. Their use in such circumstances violates the laws of war and amounts to war crimes. For years, Israeli and Palestinian authorities have systematically failed to credibly investigate alleged war crimes. The the International Criminal Court prosecutor should investigate Israeli attacks in Gaza that evidently killed civilians unlawfully, rocket attacks by Palestinian armed groups against Israel that violate the laws of war, and other grave abuses, including the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution.
Israeli violence did not end in May. This is a photo of Mohammad Bajat, who was 12 years old. He was shot sitting in the back seat of his family's car. The Israeli government has not yet had time to make up an excuse. Mohammed's father, Muayyad, told Haaretz, "For 7 years we tried to have children until Mohammed arrived. They took my heart from me, they snatched it from me." Mohammad Tamimi was shot in the back with a .22 from a Ruger rifle in Nabi Saleh. Another reason to stop all Ruger arms sales to Israel. News from the Ben and Jerry's war. A court suit has been filed on behalf of an Israeli soldier who is often on duty in the West Bank that says depriving him of Ben and Jerry's, his favorite ice cream, would be discriminatory. The suit was filed by his his mother. She says he spends a lot of time driving around the West Bank and wants to be able to have his favorite ice cream. As a retweeter mentioned, this is the ultimate in privilege. And an Israeli court could easily decide in the soldier's favor. The Israeli courts fervently serve apartheid. I remember a lawyer who complained in court about torture of a Palestinian prisoner, who asked the judge to look at the prisoner who was in the courtroom. The judge never did. On the website Axios, Israeli journalist Barak Ravid revealed that Israeli diplomats are being told to get Jewish leaders and allied Christian rightists to hold pickets in front of Ben and Jerry's stores. I'm going to predict not much of that will happen. Jewish rightists held a so-called rally against anti-Semitism last month in Washington under the title No Fear. It was endorsed by Jewish federations, the ADL, and Jewish sections of the Democratic and Republican Party. It had 20 speakers and lavish publicity, but few people showed up. The Times of Israel claimed 2,000, but the Washington Post spoke of hundreds. Either way, the turnout was small. Jews are wising up about their so-called leaders, people who were in bed with Trump, who allowed all kinds of racism and anti-Semitism to run free. Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield, the founders of the Vermont Ice Cream Company, had an op-ed in the New York Times on the 28th. While standing fast to the decision of the company to stop selling in the territories, they wrote, "But it's possible to support Israel and oppose some of its policies." Actually, that's wrong. Israel won't allow it. You have to support the whole Zionist program that all of Palestine belongs to Jews only. Otherwise, you're considered an enemy by the parties who have run the Israeli government for decades. That explains the fury of Israel over this question of ice cream. So what are the thousands awakened to Palestinian suffering in May going to do about this? Some Palestinians are having photos taken of themselves eating Ben and Jerry treats. Why not go further? Go in groups to Ben and Jerry's store, order ice cream cones and such, and take photos of the group eating the Ben and Jerry's product, and then post them online. A fine article in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz by a woman from the country of India who is a journalist who's had her life turned upside down by the Modi government there that is using the Pegasus spy software that was made by an Israeli company. Now you might say, hey, it's a private company and the government can't be knowing everything that's going on. But you've got to realize the main exports of Israel today are security and surveillance techniques and products. Netanyahu's government was fully on board with this. This is a government scandal. Edward Snowden has the best idea about this. He says treat Pegasus as the worst computer virus malware and make it illegal to use it or sell it. The brilliant artist, satirist Eli Valley came across this pin on Twitter, evidently made in Israel, twinning the Confederate and Israeli flags. Evidently, people can wear it in Israel without shame. This is just what the 150 Jewish signers of the Take Down the Israeli Flag letter have been saying. For more, go to the website takedowntheisraeliflag.com. The site SaudiUS.org notes today's headline in the Washington Post about a torture incident in Saudi Arabia. And it recalls Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal's appearance at the commencement in May of the University of New Haven. UNH has aided the Saudi regime for years by assisting its King Fahd police/military college. Blumenthal's appearance was shameful. It was giving UNH the green light to renew its ties with the notorious Saudi college. For more, go to SaudiUS.org. As we record, word has reached us that the activist and writer Glen has died. He had a great voice and had been a DJ on various radio stations. He was the first to play a new thing called rap. But he told me he turned against that kind of music after it went gangsta, which he said happened under the influence of money men of the big music corporations. After leaving commercial radio, he then devoted his efforts to activism, to anti-capitalist politics. We went our separate ways over foreign policy issues years ago. But there was no doubting Glen's oratorical ability, his passion, and his concerns for his black compatriots. We recorded a number of his speeches from 2010 to 2013. Here's a section from one speech he gave in 2010 in West Haven, Connecticut, just before unions were to have a big rally in D.C. for the Democrats.
What passes for politics in the corporate media is very much like TV wrestling, only it's not as much fun. As a kid, I liked TV wrestling. I was drawn into television wrestling by the late, great Bobo Brazil. He was the biggest black wrestler of his time, and he was extremely good looking. He had this great smile. And the whole idea, when I was a kid, the whole idea of him losing hurt me to my heart. And even though I knew that TV wrestling was phony, that didn't matter to me, because he was Bobo Brazil. His real name was Houston Harris, and he really was from Little Rock, Arkansas, but that didn't matter to me either, and it still doesn't matter. I also like the tag team matches because tag teams are twice as phony and therefore twice as funny. They are hilariously phony. Today's two-party politics reminds me of nothing so much as tag team wrestling on the television. Here's how it goes. The entire show is owned by one company. All the wrestlers work for the same company. The only real competition is about which wrestlers are going to be assigned to win their matches and who will be assigned to lose. Now, a wrestler like Bobo Brazil, who can engage the crowd and make them suspend their disbelief and imagine that the game is real, he is good for business, and therefore he's going to be allowed to win because that is good for the company. The company always wins because the company owns not just the wrestlers, they own the whole game and the television rights to it. At this juncture in history, Wall Street owns the whole major political party game. In fact, with Obama's election, Wall Street owns more of the Democrats than the Republicans because they paid more for them. The campaign contributions tell the tale. The ownership of the parties is an open and obvious fact, as open and obvious as the proprietorship of TV wrestling. And the phoniness of the game should be as obvious to everyone as is TV wrestling. Yet Americans pretend not to know that the political party players are owned by the same company. Much of the public eagerly buy into the fiction that real power is at stake in the major party political games. In 2008, however, the owners of the game, and I mean Wall Street, experienced a deep crisis that forced them to reveal that the two parties were not really antagonists at all, that they weren't actually on the opposite teams. Bush and Obama, or if you will, McCain and Obama, were on the same side. They were part of the same Wall Street finance capitalist tag team.
We link to a number of Ford's talks at thestruggle.org. Now, video from the climate group 350.
Here's how we're going to get the Federal Reserve Bank to stop funding climate destruction. First, the problem. U.S. banks have collectively funneled $1.2 trillion into fossil fuels in the past 5 years since the Paris Agreement. This is the money that keeps corporations like Exxon, Shell, and BP alive. And big banks aren't going to stop financing climate chaos on their own. They've told us that quite clearly.
We're going to need oil and gas for a long time.
We should lend to those companies to help make progress faster rather than divest from them.
So there's a very direct economic connection, which if banks such as JP Morgan don't change their practices, ultimately it's very poor business over the longer term.
Now, the solution. There is a way we can stop them, and it's the U.S. Federal Reserve's job to do it. The Federal Reserve System, or the Fed, is the referee of the economy. It was created to regulate the economy for all the people. Not only do they have the legal authority to make fossil fuel finance less desirable and possibly set limits on financing of those fuels, it's their responsibility. Climate chaos is a disaster for all of us, including our economy. But under the current leadership of Chairman Jerome Powell, the Fed is failing on climate. But instead of supporting Black, brown, and indigenous communities hit hardest by the climate crisis and COVID-19, Powell's Fed bailed out the planet-killing fossil fuel industry to the tune of billions. Oil and gas corporations aren't suddenly going to stop fracking and drilling because it's the right thing to do. It's going to take the full weight of the climate movement pushing the Fed in order to stop them. Please sign the petition and share this video.
Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont tweeted that smoke from the West Coast wildfires was reaching Connecticut, and that was a sign to do something to preserve the climate. The Sierra Club Connecticut replied, "Exactly so, at Gov. Ned Lamont. Is your administration still approving new fracked gas power plants, subsidizing gas pipelines, and incentivizing fossil fuel equipment? Gas expansion is digging us further and further into our climate problem. Stop gas expansion before it's too late."
In the Philippines, police shot dead 2 activists Monday who were spray painting the words "Oust Duterte" on public property ahead of President Rodrigo Duterte's State of the Nation address. The Philippines-based rights group Defend Bicol condemned the killing, saying, quote, "Dissent may take on many forms, but to kill innocent, unarmed civilians in the dead of the night for painting the people's call is purely fascist and brutal," they said. Rights groups estimate there have been over 400 extrajudicial killings since Duterte took office. Thousands have been killed since Duterte unleashed a brutal so-called war on drugs. Authorities in Haiti have arrested the head of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse's security team as part of its probe into Moïse's assassination on July 7th. It remains unclear how Moïse's assassins were able to get by the president's security detail without firing a shot. Haitian authorities have also issued an arrest warrant for Supreme Court Justice Wendell Coq-Telot. Her whereabouts are unknown. Meanwhile, CNN is reporting some of the court clerks involved in the investigation of Moïse's assassination have received multiple death threats.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.